Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we explore entertaining and enlightening discussions of the adventure of life and all things good. From science and technology to history and philosophy to leadership and success. We hope to give you a better understanding of the world and skills for everyone to pursue their own adventure.
Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Bufnagle the podcast, where we talk about all things good in the pursuit of the adventure of life. I'm Rafe, and you know what? It's always a great show because we get to do a podcast about things that we like with people that we like, and this week is no exception. Before we go any further, I want to thank all our listeners for being out there. Because of you guys, we are a global top 10% podcast. As always, you can reach us at bufnagle@bufnagle.com. Send us a note, and we may respond. Probably like how God answers prayers. So you never know what you're going to get with that one. Feel free to leave us a 5-star review if you like. If you don't want to leave us 5 stars, then just take your little review and write it on a little sheet of paper, tear it up real small, and then throw it on the fire. But leave us a good review. That would be wonderful for us. And remember to share the love, share the buff. Tell your friends to listen, and you will get a free episode, and all will be right with the world. You know, Harry, if you're doing a lot of podcasts or even listening to a lot of podcasts, you're going to get thirsty. And you know what you're going to need?
What's that?
A smoothie.
Oh, yeah. You know what? I know what you need. You need the BlendJet 2. It's portable, so you can blend up a smoothie at work, a protein shake at the gym, a margarita on the beach, or in your kitchen while you listen to the buff. It's small enough to fit in a cup holder and powerful enough to blast through tough ingredients like ice and frozen fruit with ease. It's whisper quiet, so you can make your morning smoothie without waking up the whole house. And it lasts for 15 plus blends, recharges quickly via USB-C. And best of all, it cleans itself. Just blend a water with a drop of soap and you're good to go. It's all clean. Squeaky clean. You know what? They got all kinds of colors, all kinds of patterns. I like to use just simple black. It's classy.
Well, that's because you're a classy guy, Harry. But you know what? Regardless of what kind of class level you have, there's a BlendJet 2 smoothie making blender for you. So the question is, what are you waiting for? Go to the blendjet.com link in our description below and grab yours today. Be sure to use the promo code BUFNAGLE to get 12% off your order and free 2-day shipping. No other blender in the market comes close to the quality, power, and innovation of BlendJet 2. They guarantee you will love it or you will get your money back. Blend any time, anywhere with the BlendJet 2 portable blender. Go to the blendjet.com link in the description and use the code BUFNAGLE to get 12% off and free 2-day shipping. Shop today and get the best deal ever. Our guest today is I think our guest may be the most what's the right word? Most common guest? Is that our most common guest is far from common. Let's just say that. Let's say it that way.
I would say I'm your most frequent guest. That's how I would say it.
Yeah, you see, and that's why you are a frequent guest.
Here.
That's right.
And for those of you who already know who's talking, yes, that's me.
And this is Bob Luzenski, America's favorite rocket scientist, talking to us about all things rocketry, space, and anything else that we happen to ask him. And he will generally say, "I'm a rocket scientist. I'm not a whatever I asked him about." So but when it comes to rocketry, this is the man to ask. And I do this on a regular basis. And we discussed some things on the most previous Saturday, which saw the launch of, well, okay, so I'm going to start talking here, and Bob's going to go, and he's going to get it exactly right for me. I saw the second launch of Starship Super Heavy by SpaceX, and I saw it, and I think it's the second. Can I call it Starships? Let's get the name right. What exactly did I watch on that Saturday?
Let's start there. You launched a big rocket that SpaceX launched down in South Texas. The name of it is generally it's referred to. Starship refers to the whole rocket as well as just the upper stage, which is the spacecraft that goes into space.
So it's a 2-stage rocket.
It's 2 parts. Yep.
All right, but each part has, like, together it has a name, and each part separately has a name, but one of the names is the same as the name of the whole thing.
Yes. that isn't confusing, but if you think about it, the space shuttle was no different.
Okay.
The people referred to the space shuttle, and they also referred to the part that actually went into orbit as the space shuttle.
Okay, so the
So
shuttle
it's
was
very simple. So yeah, so the upper stage is called Starship, and the booster or the first stage is called Super Heavy, and certainly Super Heavy is very aptly named. As big as it is, and as much weight as it can carry, and as much as it weighs itself, and the 33 very powerful Raptor engines that are at the base of Super Heavy.
So now we've seen this. We saw not this version of this. I mean, so I never know if it's the rocket is like the design or the general design, but we saw a rocket.
We saw the first flight of Starship Super Heavy back in April.
And we talked about that then, and that was a glorious test mission, and it ended spectacularly with a name. What do they call it? Unplanned. What do they call
Rapid Unplanned Disassembly, also known as RUD.
It had a RUD, a rapid unplanned disassembly, and then so they revamped some things and tested some stuff and make some stuff better, and looked at all the data that they had, and they launched this other one in a very tight launch window on Saturday morning. And what's interesting to me, among the many things that are interesting to me, watching these things now compared to watching Apollo flights back in the fog of my memory on the black and white TV, it seemed to me like the countdowns for the old Apollo launches were like gigantically long, and they set them, and it was like marching. Like there was, I don't ever remember. I'm sure there were, but I don't remember any starts and stops or any but they were really long, like many hours long. But this thing seemed to be like, I turned it on and all of a sudden they were like, yeah, we're really close here. And then they kind of fire up the countdown. They stop at 40 seconds to make sure that, check the last little things. And if they get a thumbs up, then they go. And otherwise, and everything went according to plan with the launch, right? With at least the countdown.
Yeah, it was incredible. There are some different, SpaceX does some things, especially with regard to countdowns, differently than traditional rockets, and the differences are interesting. One of the most noticeable for me as an old timer who has watched space flights since the Mercury missions back in the early '60s, and then on to Gemini and Apollo, the all the human space flights, and all the uncrewed space flights and rockets and spaceships and launches since then. One of the things that's really interesting that SpaceX does is their countdown is very automatic, and so you don't hear all these these things being read off. They're not following paper like we did down with the shuttle, and you're not hearing all these calls and responses from the launch crew because they're all doing things automatically. And even when they pull to say go for launch, it's a push button that they push. And so we don't hear all that. And for me, that was actually one of the more comforting things. Watching these things for so long, you would hear all that and you would know what's going on, right?
But so when it's automatic and they say the light, they have a plan, right? So we're generally going to go in this order. And if you're good, press the green button, and if you're not good, press the red button or equivalent, right? Or something, probably exactly. A mouse pad or something, right? And so, but that's still going on behind the scenes. We're just not seeing it.
Exactly. Whereas we used to hear all that, and so there was this patter, and there was this, and it seemed like a buildup. And
it created better TV, Bob. It was like,
absolutely better entertainment for sure. Yeah. But the interesting thing too is, for the space shuttle, the actual launch countdown lasted a good 2.5 days, something like that. It started with the call to stations. Basically, I think it was like 2.5 days before the actual scheduled planned launch. Well, with SpaceX, the countdown lasts a little over 2 hours.
Okay.
For this Starship Super Heavy. They literally they started fueling, and it's only because it's such a big rocket. They start putting the onboard propellants on board, and because it's so big, it takes a while, and that's part of the reason why the countdown is 2 hours instead of shorter. Otherwise, they would make it shorter. For example, the business end of the countdown for a Falcon 9, the SpaceX's operational rocket, starts at about 40 minutes before launch. And the other thing that SpaceX doesn't do is they don't have planned holds. They have spots where they can hold, like, for example, at that T minus 42nd for the Starship. They have spots where they can hold, but they don't have built-in holds like on the space shuttle. We had a built-in hold at T minus 20 minutes that was 10 minutes long, and we had another built-in hold at T minus 9 minutes that was 10 minutes long. And that were just those were places where they could stop, make sure everything was going okay, and then go into the final terminal count at T minus 9 minutes. And those times were chosen for specific reasons, because they could do certain things up till that point. And so that was a hold to say, okay, we're gonna take a breather here. We're gonna make sure we're all good. And then if we're all good, we're gonna continue out of this hold and go to the next one. But SpaceX doesn't do that. So it's really interesting, the differences there.
Yeah. Well, so I was just, so we watched this little count. It started at, it launched at what, about 8:00 Eastern. It was 8:30.
Yeah, it was 8:02.5, something like that.
Eastern time is 7:00 Central.
Yeah, it was planned for 7 Central time in the U.S. And there was, as far as if I remember correctly, there was a boat that was in the exclusion zone that they had to chase out, and it wasn't quite out yet. Really remarkable, actually, that they only had a 20-minute launch window on Saturday for a rocket that only has flown one other time, and they got off within that time. So that's, you want to start checking off the boxes that say this was good. That was one of the first, this was good.
Okay, so they talk about a launch window, and I can understand, in my understanding of, like, the Earth is spinning around, okay, and if you're shooting to the moon, you're going to have to try to hit this moving target thing, and it makes sense that you launch.
Planes have to align and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah, there's all sorts of things going on. So I can understand the concept of a launch window. A 20-minute launch window seems to me to be so narrow. Like, what in particular, because what they ended up, I guess I heard a couple of things. We're going to launch, we're going to do separation, we're going to coast around the world, and we're going to land outside of Hawaii.
Yes, we should actually start there.
So what's the? Okay, let me do it this way. What were the objectives? All right, and then why was that launch window so tight in that regard?
Okay, I'll take the second one first. Okay. I don't know. I don't know the answer, because unlike the NASA flights, we know less about this of the details.
Okay, all right.
So it's hard, and it's hard for me, someone who's watched space flight throughout the decades here. Because this is a commercial company, we don't know everything that's going on. They won't have a press briefing, post-launch press briefing, where they answer questions for the press and give a briefing about what happened. That we're not going to get that, and that's frustrating for me, because I want to know more, because I'm used to getting more when NASA does it.
Right.
But this isn't NASA right now, so it's SpaceX, and they don't owe us anything. So
I understand.
The fact that they do show the launch is great. So yes, the plan for this, the flight plan for this flight was to launch, to have staging between the Super Heavy and the Starship, and then for the Starship to achieve not quite orbital velocity and do one loop around the Earth and come back and re-enter in near northwest of Hawaii, where there is a a military range, where they have observational assets that they could observe the reentry with.
Wonderful. Okay.
And the Starship was planned to both the Super Heavy and the Starship were not going to be recovered. If everything had gone well, the Super Heavy was intended to do a water landing, testing out some but not all of the aspects of control needed to eventually be able to bring the booster, the Super Heavy, back to the launch site. And as far as the Starship was going, at its best, it was going to do the reentry and survive, and then belly flop into the ocean. So that was the plan.
All right. Okay. So there were so many places where I kind of want to stop and then go down that rabbit hole and then come back and stop. But let's do it. Let's do it this way. So I want to talk first about the Super Heavy rocket, the booster, the launch, the piece on the bottom, the first stage.
Yep.
This was essentially the same booster that was launched in April. Yes.
Yes. So yeah, SpaceX, the first launch was wildly unsuccessful. It got off the pad, but had lots of engine failures in flight, in first stage flight, didn't successfully separate the two stages, and then eventually the whole thing broke up.
Okay, so that's one thing I wanted to mention, because I remember seeing the little graphic. One thing that I found wonderful is they show you, when you're watching this on the screen, is they show you a picture of the rocket, which at a certain point it becomes not very exciting anymore because it's a metal tube with fire coming onto the end. But the other thing is, I guess I'll call it the telemetry, which I'm suddenly realizing I may not know exactly what that word means, but information about the rocket.
Yes, telemetry is exactly the right word.
Okay, but they also show you other things. Like they have a graphic that represents the 33 engines that are at the base of this booster. Yep. And the light is on if they're working, and the light is off if they're not. And I remember the one in April, there were some of the lights were not on. So I was like, well, those engines aren't working.
Too many of the lights were not on.
Yeah, and it was like 3 or 4 or 5, something like that, or was it more than that?
It was 5 or 6, depending, because one kept coming, one went on and off, but I think ultimately 6 failed.
But Saturday there were 33 lights on the whole time I was watching that little graphic there.
Yes,
and that was all
33, and that is the first time that's happened.
Really,
in their testing, in their testing program with the boosters they've been building, and this was booster 9, if I'm not mistaken. It might have been booster 7. Anyways, they've built several boosters, and this is the first time in all the testing they've done, including static fires testing on the ground, where they didn't come up to full thrust, but they lit all 33 engines. This is the first time all 33 have actually lit. And, wow. And they ran the whole time they needed to, which was remarkable.
Well, and then this question, like my question is, as a stat guy, I'm sure there's reliability. There's some overload. There's some redundancy, I guess they call it, built into those. You probably don't need all 33.
They can lose 3. Which is why on the first flight they lost 6. It wasn't a good day,
right? But you can't just be flipping a coin, even if the coin has a 98% chance of success. You can't just flip the coin with all 33 engines. You have to know what is causing those bad boys to shut down. And I'm sure they've done that. Has the reliability of that engine in that cluster, or in those clusters, has improved over these 7 or 9, however many booster testing? Do you know?
It clearly has. It clearly has, because April, it didn't do nearly as well as this, and there are a number of things. So the thing I want to say about the difference between April and now is that, and this goes to how the process works, right? A commercial launch requires a license from the FAA to launch. Okay. So SpaceX got a license from the FAA back in April. they launched as quickly as they could after they got that license. And then when the mishap occurred, and a mishap in terms of the FAA license, a mishap is the flight didn't go as planned according to what SpaceX told the FAA they were going to do.
Here's our flight plan. If it deviates from the flight plan, that's not good.
It's a mishap. It is a mishap, which requires an investigation, which the FAA participates in, but it's primarily done by the company with the FAA's participation. And then a report is submitted to the FAA, and the FAA has to prove that report before they will issue another launch license. And currently, the language in the FAA's license for the Starship Super Heavy, they're giving them a very short leash. They're only allowing them to do one at a time. So they're not saying, okay, this is good for the next 10 flights. It's no. This is good. This license is good for one flight.
All right. And so part of that is, get your engines working right. Make sure your staging works right now. Right. Now I want to talk about staging, because this was a big discussion. I remember I guess I'll call it the broadcast. So you have a bottom stage or first stage, and then you have a second stage, and the bottom stage is called Super Heavy, and the top one's called
Starship.
Thank you. And the idea is the first stage lifts the whole mess up there, and then the first stage drops away, and then the second stage continues doing what it does. And to do that separation, there's, however many ways you can put things together. There are a lot of ways to take them apart. And they did a new thing with this separation. They did what's called like live fire separation or something like that. There's a big fancy name for. They basically they just fired up the top rocket even when the bottom rocket was still going, right?
It's called hot staging.
Hot staging.
And it's unusual in the U.S., but Russia's been doing it with their rockets for a long time. And basically it's because the rationale for doing hot staging, which is basically the first stage continues to fire, although at reduced thrust, while the second stage engines ignite, and then they pull away then the second stage pulls away from the first stage on its own power. That's hot staging. The way generally, for example, the Saturn V in the old days, and even SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket does it, is the first stage stops thrusting completely, then it separates from the second stage, then the second stage engines ignite after some delay. And that's sort of the traditional way of doing it, if I can say that. But what happens while they're coasting is gravity is still sucking, as gravity does.
Right. Yep.
And so you have what are called gravity losses, because the whole thing starts being tugged downward from gravity because you're not thrusting upwards against gravity. So there's a loss there. By doing hot staging, you basically obviate that loss by thrusting continually the whole time.
And that's enough to. Okay, I can see that that's obviously true.
The math works.
Really?
I'm not. Okay. I am a rocket scientist, according to Bufnagle the podcast, but I haven't done that math. But people have. Obviously, SpaceX has, and they decided between the first launch of Starship Super Heavy and the second one, they actually changed the way they were doing staging, because there was some kind of really crazy and very unconventional way they were planning on doing it on the first flight, which I still to this day don't fully understand what it was supposed to do. It didn't do that because it didn't go well. But this is understandable to me.
So if we build a rocket and do hot staging, obviously, and you intend to recover the first stage, obviously that second stage is going to produce some damage, some heat damage, some fire damage, most likely, right? Is that
the exhaust of the second stage engines are going to impinge on the upper stage? So the thing there is what SpaceX did within that 6 months, which is also remarkable. I believe they were designing it already at the time, but what SpaceX did was they they added another 1 or 2 meter section to the top of the super heavy booster that was basically a shield for the fuel tank on top. And then or propellant tank, I should say propellant tank, because I don't know whether the fuel or the oxidizer is on top. So the propellant tank on top was protected. And then on the sides, around the circular sides of the rocket, it's basically vented.
So the gases come out and go to the side.
Yeah. And they're deflected off of that shield on top of the upper propellant tank, and they go out. And it actually, as we watched that, when we watched the launch, it made a really cool gaseous, kind of orange gaseous kind of nebula, almost like you would look at, in if you were looking through a telescope. It was really kind of neat.
And so that was the hot staging, and that worked. From everything I saw, they were like, that was flawless. That was
it just worked. It absolutely worked. There were a lot of people who thought that just wasn't going to happen. It was like that. This will be where it fails.
Well, it just seems to me like that as far as the things that are complex in launching a rocket, when there's got to be a lot of them up there, gimbling engines and gyroscopes and all sorts, like that seems to be like, if I light a very bright fire on top of this, it should release, unless there's a piece that gets stuck on there and doesn't come. But that's got to be pretty. I mean,
the things. Yes, realistically, that shouldn't have been an area where anybody thought it was going to fail. They can do this, the structural engineer analysis with the tools the CAD tools that we have nowadays. They could know, and they did do some real testing on a sample piece.
Bob, we used to do multi-stage model rockets.
Yes, we did.
Yes, we did, and we did.
And they were made with cardboard tubes.
And we were 14-year-old kids, and we could reuse the lower stages.
Yes, we did.
At the time, back in the day. SpaceX, get with it.
Well, they obviously did that successfully, and this is the point. Actually, I should say, I talked about that beautiful hot staging nebula that was produced during the hot staging event. The weather could not have been better on Saturday. The weather down in Texas was just literally perfectly clear. They launched just around sunrise. I don't remember if it was a few minutes before sunrise or just after sunrise, but it was just literally perfect. And
so what's the name of the little place where they are on the Texas coast?
Boca Chica is on the island there. That was the name of the town.
Boca Chica.
They've basically taken it over.
Sure.
And there are a few residents that still live there, but for example, they had to evacuate because they live actually too close for the launch with all the propellants. If things were to go really badly.
Now the propellants, if I remember, I saw a sketch of the rocket and the big tank. Just a very loose sketch of like what's inside the rocket, and there's a I guess I'll call it a fuel tank. And there's what you call it, an oxidizer tank. So the oxidizer is liquid oxygen.
Yes,
liquid oxygen. And the fuel is methane, right?
Or methane if you're on the other side of the ocean.
Really? Methane. Okay. Methane. All right. So
yeah.
Okay. So it's methane, and it's just it burns and it makes carbon dioxide and water. So that's your sure beats like I don't know, some sort of wacky chemical like sodium.
Which is why the exhaust plume was this beautiful shade of blue.
Yes.
And I don't know I hope you noticed, and I hope any of our listeners who watched or go after listening to us go find a replay of the launch. The Mach diamonds, the shockwave diamonds underneath the first stage in this blue flame, like the blue flame, on your gas stove, and the shockwave diamonds that there were, I think, 4 of them throughout the whole exhaust trail that were just really cool looking. That
Yeah.
looked really cool.
It was so it launches. It goes up about, it was maybe a minute and a half, something like that for the first stage.
2.5 minutes were the first stage.
2.5, okay.
And the hot staging happened. And this is where things started to go a little awry.
And the wheels started coming off the cart, as they say. And they,
but this is perspective. I want to point out perspective here. There is only the first stage did its job. It got the Starship, the Super Heavy got the Starship to staging, successfully staged, and the Starship went on its way. And then the Super Heavy had one other thing it needed to do, which was to turn around, do what's called a boost back burn, and then land in the ocean. This is them starting to practice the maneuvers they need to do in order to retrieve it and reuse it. So they weren't planning on retrieving it. It was going to land in the water in the Gulf of Mexico. But this was this first maneuver, the turnaround, basically turn around after going forward, turn around and start pointing backwards, and then head back towards the launch site. And that is when things didn't go well for Super Heavy. When they did the separation, the hot staging, they cut back to only 3 of the 33 engines. And then as soon as staging ended, they started firing up engines again and then turning Super Heavy. And that's when engines started failing. And eventually it got so bad after several seconds where, and we don't know whether the flight termination system caused the explosion or whether it blew up on its own, but it was having a bad day at that point, and then it ended up making a big boom. And so here's where the perspective comes in for that. There is no other company except SpaceX who is successfully retrieving their booster first stages to reuse them. No other company in the world. No one else in the world is doing this. So the fact that this booster didn't do everything it needed to do after it sent Starship on its way is like, yeah, you can't give them too hard a time at this point.
No, and this, I when I was in graduate school, I had this professor, and we would get, I had a test one time, an exam, and it was worth 30 points. And I think I got 3. And the top guy in the class got like 15.
I had a Fields and Waves. I had a Fields and Waves test.
Out of like 30 points. And I said to the professor, I said, "Why these tests are so hard? Like, how do we?" And he said, "A good test should allow you to measure where every student is." And he said, "If I give a test that somebody gets them all right, there may be things that student knows that I didn't get to see."
Wow.
And I thought, well, so that's the idea is if you have a meter stick, or if you have any sort of, you have a ruler of some kind that you're trying to measure things, and the ruler is only 1 inch long, and you measure people with it, and they're all over 1 inch. You're like, okay, well, there's no way to tell them apart, and so you have to have the measuring stick be longer than the biggest thing you're measuring, and that's the same principle here. Is you have to have the test, or the thing you're trying to do has to exceed where you can grasp. Because otherwise you will not know where you are in that system.
Yes. And the other thing I want to point out, and I've made reference several times to the SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket. I want to draw the distinction here between a operational vehicle and a test vehicle. And at this stage in the development of the Starship Super Heavy vehicle system, these are test missions. These are test flights. These are not operational flights. Yes, if an operational flight were to fail like this, that would be a bad thing, and it would be of serious concern. But SpaceX is launching their Falcon 9 operational rocket every 3 to 4 days now. That's their cadence. They're gonna exceed, or they're gonna meet or exceed 100 launches this year, and they're planning on launching 144 next year. That's incredible. No one else is coming even close to that kind of pace, and so with that level of reliability, and with recovering their first stage, their booster stage. So yeah, the booster after separation, after staging, had a bad day, but the Starship continued on for quite a while after staging.
So it was this. Okay, so how high are they? Were like 140 meters. Was I remembering that?
I think at
kilometers,
that point
140 kilometers.
They were over 100 kilometers, something like that. Yeah.
Okay, so they're over 100 kilometers. And they're out of the atmosphere at that point. Is that right? I mean,
definitely. The point of the booster in general is to get the upper stages above the air.
Above the air drag.
Above the air, so that then the upper stage can just, go sideways fast enough until it achieves orbital velocity.
Yeah, it's not about going high, it's about going fast, but it's easier to go fast when you're up high.
When you're not pushing against the air.
Right. So, okay, so the second stage fires, and that's the Starship, it's cruising along, and then they lost contact.
It was supposed to run for basically about 6 minutes, and if it had cut off successfully on time, it would have been about 8 minutes and 30 seconds, give or take. But and because the weather was so remarkable, we were able to watch. SpaceX had cameras on the thing that we could watch all the way through this, and starting at 7 minutes and 7 seconds, there was a noticeable expansion of the little dot, and there was a plume, which when I saw it, even though I wasn't watching the SpaceX stream, but the stream I was watching was at that point was carrying the video from the SpaceX stream. That I noticed right away and thought, that's not good. About 33 seconds later, at 7:40, 7 minutes and 40 seconds, there was another lesser plume that happened. And then just after 8 minutes, about 8 minutes and 3 seconds, I think it was, something like that, they both lost contact, and there was a big faint puff. That was definitely not a good day. So, and what we now know is that the upper stage also had a RUD. It's not been confirmed officially for either of the vehicles, whether it was the flight termination system that did it intentionally, or whether it just broke up of its own accord from blowing up.
And the path. This is the thing that was remarkable to me in seeing the data that I saw that you shared with me today from a number of different sites, is they track from the launch site there on the Texas coast, kind of, I guess you would probably call that east southeast, right? And the track makes this line, a very subtly curved line toward the equator, and it goes from the east coast of Texas just north of Cuba, and it slices it goes right along the top of Cuba and and Hispaniola, Haiti and the Dominican Republic, and north of Puerto Rico, and then past the Virgin Islands. And it's a remarkable line that avoids land going from the Gulf of Mexico out to the open Atlantic. And, those of us who are following along, we're at the same time we're doing this episode, we're in the middle of a series of Columbus episodes, and that's right where Columbus was. So we're aware of all these things now.
Oh, fun. Yes.
And yeah, right. So, but it goes right along it was amazing. Here, the note I wrote was incredibly precise trajectory at distance. They are threading a needle there. Yeah.
They're threading the needle because they have to. And it's the only way they can launch from the coast of Texas there is because there is that needle to thread. So, and there are a couple things I want to mention about that. So where the Starship was when it broke up, and odds are good that one was the flight termination system that did that. But and one of the reasons I say that is because I'm going to mention this is that there, if you want to check them out, there's a YouTube channel called Astronomy Live, and these guys have done things like they video through a telescope the space station, the ISS, as it's going by, and it's really interesting to watch and see that. But they had a camera set up in the Florida Keys, and they caught the explosion of the Starship, and then following that, they got actually a closer zoom on it, and you could see the upper half of the Starship
was still kind of intact.
It was intact. You could see the fins on it, and it was still intact. And then there have also been reports that I've seen video actually of that in north of Puerto Rico, where some of this would have been re-entering the atmosphere. People observed basically things re-entering.
Oh, they did see things re-entering.
Yes. Okay. So, and that all lined up with the path it was taking.
And they heard sonic booms when it was entering the atmosphere and all sorts of other
things. Yes, which means they were pretty big pieces.
And they were going really fast. Remarkably fast. That is just
because it was only seconds away from making it to its planned velocity. It was going practically very nearly orbital velocity.
And orbital velocity is, remind me?
For actually staying in orbit, it's 17,500 miles an hour for a low Earth orbit. So really fast.
That was going really fast. And then now so some of those things splashed down there in
presumably splashed in the water, north and east of Puerto Rico.
Yeah. And if you see some of the videos, not the video, some of the data presentations of that, there's a long streak of
yes, the National Weather Service radar, Doppler radar, caught the actual debris stream of both the Super Heavy and the Starship. So their radars actually caught the debris fields for both of them while they were still airborne.
Oh, that's an incredible. So the original plan was not to recover those items.
Yes.
Are they going to? So what's going to happen? What
happens next?
Okay. Well, what happens next with those pieces? Time. Yeah. Okay. So
let's do two things. One, I want to mention another YouTube channel. Scott Manley, who's a space guy and a air and space guy, and he did a very, very good quick summary on the day of the launch. So that went into some of the details that we've talked about and actually included the video. So that would be a really good episode to look at. And the other thing is where they go from here. Well, it was a mishap again. So there will be another investigation by the company with the FAA involved. The FAA already announced that yesterday. And however long that takes, whatever corrective actions come out of that will have to be done. And then they will fly again. But SpaceX has been saying that the pad apparently is in good shape. Very little damage, so that's a good improvement.
Because in April the pad was just obliterated, right? I mean,
was a hole. There was a hole in the ground. They blew the concrete out of it.
Yeah, that's right.
So there's the pad's in good shape. That's good news. They expect to have that good to go, and whatever corrective actions they have to do to the vehicles or to the procedures or how it flies to prevent whatever happened once they figure out what happened. So they have to figure out what happened, then they have to figure out corrective actions, and then they have to execute the corrective actions, put new vehicles on the pad, and then do it again. And I can't wait to come back and talk about that again next time.
Well, Bob, as usual, it is my tremendous pleasure and honor to have you join us here on the Buff. And more than that, I'm eternally grateful for your friendship. And it was great to see you a couple weeks ago when I was up there in Michigan. So I look forward to doing that again sometime soon. So thank you for coming on.
Oh, you're welcome, Rafe. It was good to see you too, and get ice cream and have dinner. And I look forward to coming back.
That's wonderful. Thanks a lot, Bob. To all our listeners, I'm going to remind you to seek the good, be the good, and spread the good, and enjoy the adventure of life.